The morning sun rose slowly over the rumbling streets of Port Harcourt, turning the early air into a golden haze. Motorcycles buzzed past traffic lights that never worked, and vendors shouted over the noise of done-for buses. Amid this chaos, a massive billboard towered above a roundabout. Fire of Glory Ministries, the home of instant miracles. Come and see what God is doing through Pastor Jeremiah. Beneath it, people in colorful attires streamed toward the glass-covered building that gleamed like a palace. It was Sunday, and the man of God everyone called Daddy G was about to perform another miracle. Inside the auditorium, packed with thousands of sweating worshippers, the choir sang with electric passion. Cameras rolled as ushers carried in a young crippled boy, legs twisted like vines. The crowd fell silent. Pastor Jeremiah, tall, handsome, dressed in a white suit that shimmered under the lights, placed his hand on the boy's head. "In the mighty name of Jesus, rise and walk," he shouted. A dramatic pause followed. Then suddenly, the boy stood up and staggered forward. The congregation erupted in tears, screams, and camera flashes. But in a dark corner near the stage, an old janitor named Baba Ibi watched quietly. He'd seen too many of these miracles. The same boy had been brought weeks ago under a different name. And each time, after the camera stopped rolling, Pastor Jeremiah disappeared into his private office, the one locked behind the altar, where only his inner circle entered. That night, long after the church emptied, Baba Ibi would see something that would change everything. A shadow moving beneath the altar, whispering in a tongue that was anything but holy. The church compound was silent after midnight. Only the hum of distant generators and the faint chippings of crickets disturbed the heavy air. Baba Ibi, clutching his broom, moved slowly toward the main auditorium. He was not supposed to be there, but curiosity burned in him like fever. As he approached the altar, he heard a low humming sound, rhythmic and strange, like someone chanting. The great white cross on the wall seemed to pulse in the flickering light. Peering through the half-open door, Baba Ibi saw Pastor Jeremiah kneeling before a small clay pot. Around him were 3 men dressed in red cloths tied around their waists. The air smelled of blood and palm oil. A black rooster lay motionless on the floor, its feathers sticky with something dark. Pastor Jeremiah's voice deepened unnaturally as he whispered, "Feed the shadow that walks with me. Let the crowds never see its face." The moment he poured the rooster's blood into the pot, the candles flickered violently. A long, dark shape, something like a shadow detached from its owner, slithered across the ground and vanished into the floor beneath the altar. Baba Ibi gasped and stumbled backward, knocking over a metal bucket. The sound echoed loudly. Pastor Jeremiah froze, his head snapped toward the noise. "Who is there?" he thundered. Baba Ibi ran as fast as his trembling legs could carry him, leaving his broom behind. From that night, he knew one thing for certain. Miracles didn't come from heaven anymore.
Pastor Jeremiah hadn't always been Daddy J. Years ago, he was just Jeremiah Eke, a struggling preacher with a small storefront ministry and 5 plastic chairs. His voice was fiery, but his congregation was poor. He envied other pastors who drove big cars, wore Italian suits, and hosted live TV programs. When he met Prophet Zama, a mysterious man from Calabar, everything changed. Zama had promised him spiritual power that attracts crowds. All he needed was to perform a midnight ritual by the riverside and make an oath never to reveal its secret. Jeremiah, desperate for success, agreed. They went deep into the mangrove swamp where fireflies danced like spirits. Zama gave him a calabash with red markings and said, "Bury your shadow in exchange for light. You will shine before men, but darkness will follow you forever." The next morning, Jeremiah's small church overflowed. A woman who had been blind claimed to see again. A cripple walked. His fame spread faster than wildfire. Radio stations invited him. Politicians started attending his services. Within months, he built the marble church at Mile 3. Yet sometimes, when he stood before the mirror, his reflection lagged a second behind, as though something else watched from behind the glass. Among those closest to Pastor Jeremiah was Sister Naomi, the beautiful choir mistress whose voice drew people to tears. She had been with him since the beginning, loyal and devoted. Rumors whispered that she was more than just a singer, that she shared the pastor's private moments far beyond choir practice. Naomi dismissed the talk with a gentle smile, but guilt haunted her eyes. One night after choir rehearsal, she confronted Jeremiah. "Daddy J, we can't keep living this lie. I've seen things I shouldn't. I hear strange voices in this church." Jeremiah grabbed her hand, his tone cold. "Naomi, some things are too sacred to question. You are blessed to serve under a man chosen by God." But Naomi wasn't convinced. She had seen the altar glow red during a late-night prayer session and heard groans beneath the floorboards. Days later, she fell ill suddenly, coughing, sweating, trembling uncontrollably. The doctors found nothing wrong. She called Jeremiah, begging for prayers. He told her to rest and assured her that the Lord was in control. That night, a heavy storm battered Port Harcourt, and Naomi's neighbors found her dead in her room by morning, eyes open, lips frozen as if she was still trying to sing. Naomi's death sent shock waves through the congregation. Her choir wept openly during Sunday service, their voices breaking mid-hymn. Pastor Jeremiah, standing at the pulpit, wore a solemn expression. "The Lord gives and the Lord takes away," he declared, tears glistening in his eyes. The crowd nodded, moved by his composure. But not everyone believed the tragedy was natural.
Baba Ibi watched the pastor carefully. During the burial, he noticed Jeremiah avoiding the coffin. When the casket was lowered, the pastor's shadow seemed to stretch unnaturally long across the ground, even though the sun was high. The old janitor's heart pounded. The same shadow he saw that night was now flickering near the grave. Later that week, strange things began happening in the church. Instruments played faintly at night when no one was there. The choir room smelt of Naomi's favorite perfume. Some ushers swore they heard her singing during midnight prayer. Jeremiah dismissed it all as spiritual attack. But deep down, he knew something had come back with Naomi's soul, and it was coming for him. Pastor Jeremiah could no longer sleep. Every night, he heard footsteps in his hallway, soft, dragging, like someone walking barefoot on wet ground. He'd wake up and find muddy footprints near his door. His wife, Ngozi, noticed his restlessness. "Jeremiah, are you okay? You talk in your sleep," she asked gently. He forced a smile. "Just the burden of ministry, my dear." But the nightmares worsened. In one dream, Naomi stood before him in her choir robe, eyes wide, singing the same song from her last rehearsal, "No hiding place for the wicked." He woke drenched in sweat. When he entered the church the next morning, the altar candles had burned down on their own. One of the red cloths from his midnight ritual was missing. He summoned his 3 inner circle pastors, men who helped him maintain his miracles. "We must renew the covenant," he said urgently. But one of them, Pastor Tony, looked uneasy. "Daddy J, maybe we should confess. People are dying." Jeremiah's eyes turned cold. "If you speak, you die before sunset." Silence followed. Outside, thunder rolled, though the sky was clear. On a crowded Sunday morning, worshippers filled Fire of Glory Ministries to the brim. The air was charged with excitement. Daddy J had announced a prophetic deliverance service. Cameras were set, journalists present. As the choir sang, a sudden chill swept through the auditorium. The lights flickered, people murmured. Then, from the back of the church, a familiar voice began to sing, soft at first, then stronger. "There is power, power, wonder-working power." Every head turned. A woman in white walked slowly down the aisle.
her face veiled, feet bare, leaving wet footprints. Jeremiah froze mid-sermon, his microphone slipping from his hand. Naomi?
Gasps spread through the hall. Some screamed, others fell to their knees. The woman's veil lifted slightly, pale skin, empty eyes. She smiled faintly and said, "Daddy G, your shadow remembers me." Before anyone could react, the lights went out completely. When they came back, the woman was gone, but the church floor was soaked as if rain had fallen only inside. The church was in chaos. Some members left, convinced the ghost was a sign of divine punishment. Others stayed, defending their pastor fiercely. "The devil is attacking God's servant," they cried. Jeremiah appeared calm in public, but inside he was unraveling. Every prayer felt empty, every sermon hollow. That night he returned to the altar to confront the spirits. "Naomi, leave me alone," he shouted. But the floor beneath the cross quivered slightly, and a whisper echoed, "You buried your shadow, Jeremiah. Now it comes for you." He fell to his knees, trembling. For the first time, his anointing failed him. Desperate, he visited Prophet Zama, the man who gave him the charm. But Zama was a shadow of himself, blind, frail, living alone in a shack. "I told you, the shadow cannot be buried forever. Each soul you deceive feeds it, and when the innocent dies, it comes for repayment." Jeremiah stared in horror. "How do I stop it?" Zama's voice broke. "You must unbury what you buried, or it will unbury you." Meanwhile, Baba Ibi secretly recorded strange occurrences, footsteps, cold winds, flickering lights, and sent them to a local journalist, Amaka Ojo, who was investigating fake miracles in Nigerian churches. Amaka arrived at Fire of Glory Ministries disguised as a new member, armed with a hidden camera. She observed how testimonies were staged. The same man who claimed to be healed from paralysis appeared again in a different disguise. "This church is a theater," she whispered into her recorder. But during one midnight vigil, Amaka caught something more chilling: Pastor Jeremiah speaking in an unknown language before a clay pot under the altar. When she reviewed the footage, a black, moving shadow appeared beside him, though no one else was there. "What is this?" she muttered, heart pounding. Her expose could destroy the biggest church in Port Harcourt. But she didn't know. Some truths are too dark to reveal without blood being spilled. Driven by terror and guilt, Jeremiah decided to end it. He returned to the mangrove swamp where it all began, carrying the same calabash wrapped in white cloth. "I will undo this," he murmured, digging frantically in the wet earth. The night was heavy with insects and whispers. He unearthed a blackened object, his old shadow charm. It pulsed faintly like something alive. Suddenly, a voice behind him spoke softly. "You cannot unbury what is bound by blood." It was Naomi's voice. He turned. She stood there, glowing faintly, eyes sad. "You used me to feed it. Now it feeds on you."
Jeremiah fell to his knees. "Forgive me, I was blinded by greed." The shadow slithered from the calabash and wrapped around his legs, dragging him into the pity dog. His screams echoed through the swamp as the darkness swallowed him whole. By morning, the only thing left was his white suit floating on the muddy water and the distant sound of a choir singing a haunting hymn. Sunday came, but Pastor Jeremiah was nowhere to be found. The church gates opened as usual, and the congregation filled every seat, waiting for their beloved Daddy J. After 30 minutes, more must be done to spread. The assistant pastor, Tony, hesitated at the pulpit. Sweat glistened on his forehead as he tried to calm the restless crowd. "The man of God is on a spiritual retreat," he announced, his voice trembling. "He will return with a greater anointing." But in his heart, Tony knew the truth. He had seen Jeremiah's abandoned car near the mangrove road the previous night. The police were called, but all they found was a torn white suit soaked in mud. The church members refused to believe he was gone. Some claimed to see him in dreams, glowing in white light. Others said he had ascended like Elijah. That night, however, the massive billboard that bore Jeremiah's smiling face cracked down the middle during a thunderstorm. The next morning, the janitor, Baba Ibi, found the cross inside the church broken clean in two. He whispered a prayer of fear and pity. "The shadow don't swallow him," he muttered under his breath. Amaka Ojo, the investigative journalist, couldn't ignore what she'd seen. She gathered her footage and prepared an expose titled "The Pastor Who Buried His Shadow." Her editors were skeptical. Nigerians love their miracles, Amaka. They won't believe this, one warned, but she persisted, airing it on national television. The broadcast exploded across the country. Hidden cameras showed fake healings, bribed actors, and Jeremiah's eerie midnight rituals. Social media erupted with shock and outrage. Some called it blasphemy, others praised her courage. People shared their own stories of manipulation and deceit in churches. As Amaka watched the chaos unfold, she felt both triumphant and uneasy. That night, her lights flickered. Her TV turned on by itself, playing Jeremiah's last sermon, the one he warned against touching God's anointed. She froze as his voice deepened unnaturally. Amaka, even the truth carries its own curse. The screen went black, leaving only her reflection, and behind her reflection, a faint, moving shadow. Fire of Glory Ministries split like a cracked wall. Half the members denounced Jeremiah as a false prophet. The other half insisted he was innocent, claiming Amaka's video was spiritual warfare. Some pastors who had once served under Jeremiah began their own ministries, copying his preaching style. The streets buzzed with debates about real men of God.
Pastor Tony tried to steady the flock, but nightmares haunted him. He saw Jeremiah every night, calling his name from the swamp. During one service, while praying, Tony suddenly froze mid-sentence, eyes wide. He dropped to his knees and screamed, "He's not gone! He's watching us!" The congregation panicked. Ushers rushed forward, but Tony fainted. Later, he confessed to Baba Ibi that Jeremiah's spirit had appeared, warning him, "Renew the covenant, or the shadow will consume the rest." Baba Ibi, trembling, begged him to close the church. But greed and fear are close cousins. Tony kept the doors open, and by doing so, invited the darkness back in. One rainy night, Tony decided to pray alone inside the church. Lightning flashed through the glass walls. He knelt before the altar, sobbing, "Lord, show me mercy." Suddenly, the floorboards beneath the cross began to shift. The earth split slightly, revealing the clay pot Jeremiah once buried. A foul odor filled the air. Tony reached out to touch it, but the moment his fingers brushed the rim, black smoke burst forth. The shadows coiled around him, whispering, "Feed us!" He screamed and stumbled backward. When he turned to flee, Naomi's ghost stood in the doorway, silent and still, her eyes glowing faintly. "You cannot serve two masters," she whispered. The next morning, the congregation found the church empty, except for Tony's Bible, open to the verse, "What does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul?" The clay pot was gone, and on the wall behind the altar, written in soot, were the words, "He buried his shadow here." Rumors spread like wildfire. Other pastors who had once associated with Jeremiah began to experience strange misfortunes, accidents, deaths, madness. One collapsed during service, screaming that something was pulling his legs underground. Another disappeared after claiming he saw Jeremiah at midnight in his compound. Amaka followed these events closely, suspecting a pattern. She interviewed Baba Ibi, who told her about the night Jeremiah buried his shadow. It was not power from God. It was darkness wearing white cloth. Amaka decided to return to the swamp to find proof, unaware that the curse now had her name etched into it. Meanwhile, worshippers reported seeing Jeremiah's ghost walking near the church gate at dawn, preaching in silence. Children ran in fear. The government sealed the building, but at night, the choir's faint singing could still be heard, echoing from within, Naomi's song of judgment. Amaka journeyed to the swamp with Baba Ibi as her guide. The air was thick with mist, the water black as ink. "This is where he made his covenant," he said, pointing to a mound of earth. Amaka began to dig carefully, her camera rolling. Suddenly, her spade struck something hard, a clay pot covered in strange carvings.
As she lifted it, the ground trembled. A whisper filled the air. "Who unburies the buried?" The pot cracked, releasing a surge of cold wind that extinguished their torch. Amaka's camera flickered wildly, capturing a faint human shape emerging from the fog. Jeremiah, or what was left of him. His eyes were hollow, his smile broken. "You cannot expose what was made in darkness," he said. Amaka screamed, dropping the camera. Baba Ibi pulled her away, shouting prayers as they ran. When they looked back, the swamp was calm again, but the clay pot was gone, and Jeremiah's laughter echoed faintly across the still water. News spread that Fire of Glory's grounds had become haunted. Motorists avoided Mile 3 at night. Even hawkers crossed themselves when passing by. Some said they saw light glowing beneath the sealed-shut doors. Others swore they heard Naomi's voice singing from the roof. A group of prophets arrived claiming they could cleanse the place. They prayed, sprinkled oil, and shouted for hours. But one by one, they fled in terror. The last prophet ran out screaming, "The altar breathes!" The government threatened demolition, but engineers refused to touch the structure after strange accidents occurred on site. Amaka returned secretly to record one last documentary, calling it Faith and Fear, the Price of Power. She stood before the crumbling church and whispered to a camera, "Some men trade their souls for fame, but the darkness never forgets its debt." As she spoke, the wind carried a faint voice, Naomi's, softly replying, "And neither do the dead." That night, Amaka dreamt of Naomi standing in a white field, her face peaceful for the first time. "Thank you," Naomi said. "You've given me a voice again." Amaka asked, "Why do you linger?" Naomi's expression darkened. "Because the shadow still feeds. Until the altar is destroyed, it will keep haunting souls." Amaka woke with a start. Determined, she gathered volunteers from the community, including Baba Ibi, and led them to the church. They broke the gates and stormed the building with hammers and holy water. As they struck the altar, the floor erupted in a gust of black smoke, forming a towering shadow that screamed like 100 voices. Amaka raised her camera, shouting, "Let the world see the truth." Lightning flashed, and Naomi's spirit appeared, standing between the people and the shadow. "Return to the pit," she commanded. The shadow screamed and dissolved into ash. The candles went out. Silence followed. When the smoke cleared, the altar was gone, and Naomi vanished with it, leaving behind only a faint scent of jasmine. Days later, the government officially demolished the ruins of Fire of Glory Ministries. A new playground was built in its place. Naomi Peace Park. People came to pray, not for miracles, but for forgiveness. The old congregation scattered, some turning back to humble fellowships, others abandoning religion altogether. Amaka's documentary won awards across Africa, sparking debates about fake pastors and the price of blind faith. She visited Baba Ibi to thank him, but found his room empty. Only his broom remained, leaning against the wall, and a note, "The truth is the only miracle worth dying for." That night, Amaka stood by the playground, gazing at the spot where the altar once stood. Fireflies danced over the grass. She whispered a silent prayer for Naomi and for all those deceived by darkness disguised as light. In the distance, church bells rang, but to her ears, they sounded like chains breaking. Months passed. Peace returned to Port Harcourt, though whispers of the past lingered. Amaka continued her journalism, determined to uncover more hidden evils. One evening, while editing footage alone, she noticed something strange. In the reflection of her office window stood a tall man in white, smiling faintly, Pastor Jeremiah. Her breath caught. She whispered, "You're gone." His reflection tilted its head. "Did you think darkness dies that easily?" it murmured. The lights flickered. Then, just as suddenly, he vanished, leaving only her reflection and a faint outline of a shadow moving behind her. Amaka turned off her computer and faced the camera one last time. "This is not the end," she said quietly. "As long as men crave power more than truth, more shadows will be buried." She saved the file, labeled it Final Testimony, and walked out into the night, unaware that her own shadow lingered a moment longer
before following. The wind carried Naomi's final whisper through the city. No man buries his shadow forever.